have taken over the bottom of Lake Michigan. Now researchers are testing new ways to combat invasive mussels.
12 meteorologist Gino Recchia shows us the issue for the lake's ecosystem.
For many years, people looked at the clear blue waters of Lake Michigan and believed the lake was healthy again. But below the surface, a silent invasion was taking place. Trillions of tiny invasive mussels were slowly removing the lake's food chain. Scientists feared the lake's entire food chain was beginning to fall apart. Then they discovered something unexpected. A native fish that many people had ignored and called a worthless catch had been quietly fighting the invaders all along. Could this forgotten fish be the lake's last hope for survival? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. The native fish that changed everything for Lake Michigan. For many years, people looked at Lake Michigan and believed it was becoming healthier than ever before. On bright summer mornings, the water looked so clear that people could walk into the lake until the water reached their chest and still look down and clearly see every toe on their feet. Swimmers loved the clear water because it looked fresh and clean. Divers who explored old shipwrecks at the bottom of the lake also noticed something unusual. They could see much farther than people could many years earlier. In some places, they could reportedly see almost 100 feet through the water. To almost everyone, this looked like wonderful news. Clear water usually makes people believe a lake is healthy. It gives the feeling that nature is doing well. However, scientists allegedly discovered that this beautiful view was hiding a serious problem. The lake was not becoming healthier. Instead, it was slowly losing the tiny living things that kept the entire ecosystem alive. The clear water was not a sign of life. It was becoming a sign that the lake was slowly becoming empty. The story of this change allegedly began in 1988, when a scientist found a small shell that did not belong in the Great Lakes. The shell belonged to a zebra mussel. This small creature originally came from the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, thousands of miles away from North America. Experts believe the mussel arrived inside the ballast water carried by large ships that traveled across the ocean. When ships reached the Great Lakes, they released the water, and the tiny mussels entered a new environment where almost nothing could stop them. At first, nobody believed this small shell would become a huge problem. It looked too small to change such a massive lake. However, that belief quickly proved to be wrong. Allegedly, one female zebra mussel can produce around 1 million eggs every year. Because they reproduced so quickly, the population exploded in only a few years. They spread through all 5 Great Lakes with surprising speed. Soon, they covered rocks, underwater pipes, docks, boat hulls, and even old shipwrecks resting on the lake floor. Large parts of the bottom became covered with thick layers of mussels packed tightly together. Before long, another invader arrived. This one was called the quagga mussel. It also came from Eastern Europe. Scientists allegedly found that this new mussel was even better at surviving than the zebra mussel. Unlike zebra mussels, quagga mussels could live almost anywhere. They could survive on hard rocks, soft sand, and muddy lake bottoms. They could also live in much deeper water, where zebra mussels struggled to survive. Because of this advantage, quagga mussels slowly replaced zebra mussels across much of Lake Michigan. Their numbers continued growing until they became the dominant species. Today, experts reportedly believe there are around 300 trillion invasive mussels living in Lake Michigan alone. Across all the Great Lakes, the number may be close to 750 trillion. These numbers are almost impossible to imagine. The biggest problem was not simply that the mussels existed. It was what they were doing every single day. Every mussel filters water to remove tiny living organisms that float inside it. These tiny plants are called phytoplankton, while the tiny animals are called zooplankton. They are so small that most people never notice them. Even though they cannot easily be seen, they are one of the most important parts of the lake. They are the first food eaten by many small creatures, which are then eaten by larger fish, which are later eaten by even bigger fish, birds, and many other animals. This makes them the very bottom of the entire food chain. When trillions of mussels filtered the lake every day, they removed huge amounts of this tiny life. Scientists allegedly found that spring phytoplankton dropped by about 87% after the invasion. overall phytoplankton levels reportedly fell by around 90%. As the tiny plants disappeared, the tiny animals that depended on them also declined. Slowly, the entire food web began to weaken. Fish that depended on these tiny organisms found less food. Larger animals that depended on those fish also faced increasing problems. The lake still looked beautiful from above, but underneath the surface, much of its natural life was disappearing. If billions of invasive mussels have already emptied the bottom of the Great Lakes food chain, could one forgotten native fish be the unexpected hero that might help save the lake before it is too late? Let's find out. The forgotten fish that tried to save the Great Lakes. The number of zebra and quagga mussels had become so large that they covered huge areas of the lake bottom. They were removing the tiny plants and animals that supported almost every living creature in the lake. Fish populations were falling, and many experts feared that some important species could disappear if nothing changed. One fish suffered more than many others. The lake whitefish had supported commercial fishing in the Great Lakes for more than 100 years. It provided food, jobs, and income for many families. Allegedly, it made up most of the commercial catch in some parts of Michigan and brought in millions of dollars every year. For many years, the whitefish population remained strong. However, as the mussels spread, the number of whitefish began to fall. Reports showed that catches dropped sharply over the years. Scientists allegedly discovered that the biggest problem was not simply that fewer adult fish existed. The real danger was that very few young whitefish were surviving. After the eggs hatched, the tiny fish needed large amounts of plankton during the first days of their lives. Since the invasive mussels had removed much of that food, many young fish reportedly died before they had a chance to grow. This meant older whitefish continued getting older, while very few young fish replaced them. As time passed, entire groups of whitefish became made up mostly of old fish. Since older fish usually produce fewer healthy young, the population continued to shrink. Experts allegedly warned that many whitefish populations had reached dangerous levels, and strict fishing limits were introduced to protect the few that remained. While researchers searched for answers, they made an important discovery. A native fish that many people had ignored for generations was already eating the invasive mussels. This fish was the freshwater drum, also known by many people as the sheep's head. For many years, anglers believed it had little value. Some even treated it like a useless fish, and reportedly threw it away after catching it. Many people did not know that the freshwater drum had a special set of strong teeth deep inside its throat. These teeth were not like normal teeth used for biting. They were powerful grinding plates that could crush the hard shells of clams, snails, and mussels. Long before zebra and quagga mussels arrived, the freshwater drum had already evolved to eat shell-covered animals living in rivers and lakes. When the invasive mussels spread across the Great Lakes, the drum simply found a new food source. Large freshwater drums reportedly fed heavily on zebra and quagga mussels, crushing their shells with ease. Scientists believed this made the drum one of the most important native predators of invasive mussels in the entire Great Lakes system. Sadly, they also discovered that the fish had limits. Young freshwater drum could not crush mussel shells because their throat teeth were not yet strong enough. They had to grow to about 10 inches before they could begin eating mussels. Even the largest drum could only eat a limited number each day. Against hundreds of trillions of mussels producing millions of eggs every year, the freshwater drum simply could not keep up. It was helping, but it could not solve the problem alone. Scientists also found another fish eating the invasive mussels. This fish was the round goby. Unlike the freshwater drum, the round goby was not native to the Great Lakes. It had also arrived from Eastern Europe, allegedly inside ballast water carried by ships. The goby spread quickly and became extremely common. It fed heavily on zebra and quagga mussels and removed many young mussels before they could fully grow. At first, this looked like good news because another predator was reducing mussel numbers. However, researchers soon discovered another serious problem. Mussels often collect harmful toxins from the water. When gobies ate the mussels, those toxins allegedly moved into the gobies' bodies. Larger fish and water birds then ate the gobies, allowing dangerous diseases like botulism to spread through the food chain. This reportedly caused the deaths of many birds and fish along the shoreline. The invader that helped reduce mussels also created new dangers for the ecosystem. Scientists continued searching for other solutions. One experimental treatment used natural bacteria to kill mussels on a reef. Reports suggested that the treatment removed about 95% of the mussels in the test area. Although the results looked promising, experts admitted that treating one small reef was far easier than treating an entire lake containing hundreds of trillions of mussels. Lawmakers allegedly proposed new funding to support research and restoration efforts, while hatchery programs tried raising young whitefish to rebuild declining populations. Even with these efforts, many scientists remained concerned that time was running out. After all the damage caused by the invasive mussels, was there still hope for the lake's struggling whitefish? Let's learn more. The fish that refused to disappear. Before the sun rises over Lake Michigan, many commercial fishermen begin their work while the water is still calm and quiet. For generations, families living around the Great Lakes have depended on these waters for food and income. Fathers taught their sons how to fish, and those sons later passed the same knowledge to their own children. Every morning followed a familiar routine. Boats left the dock before daylight, nets were lowered into the cold water, and everyone hoped for a good catch. One experienced fisherman, who had spent around 40 years working on the lake, allegedly believed he had already seen both the best and the worst days of commercial fishing. His family had fished the same waters for many years, and he understood the lake better than most people. On one particular morning, however, something happened that surprised him. As the heavy fishing net was slowly pulled back onto the boat, it was filled with healthy lake whitefish. There were far more fish than many experts believed would still exist. Reports had suggested for many years that the whitefish population would continue falling because of invasive mussels that had changed the entire lake. Some scientific studies even predicted that the fishery could one day disappear if conditions did not improve. Because of these warnings, many fishermen believed they were watching the end of a way of life that had supported their families for generations. Seeing healthy whitefish once again gave many people hope that the story was not over. Although the population remained much smaller than it had been many years earlier, the fish had not vanished. They had somehow continued to survive despite everything working against them. The struggle began after zebra mussels and quagga mussels entered the Great Lakes. Allegedly, these small shellfish spread rapidly after arriving in ballast water released by large cargo ships.
The invasive mussel has reached its northernmost direction yet. Wildlife officials say this is a local population. It's not a one-off transplant from a boat.
At first, they looked harmless because each mussel was very small. However, they multiplied so quickly that they soon covered rocks, pipes, docks, boats, and almost every hard surface below the water. Their greatest impact came from the way they fed. Every mussel filtered water to remove tiny living plants and animals called plankton. These tiny organisms were the first step in the lake's food chain. Small fish depended on them, larger fish depended on the small fish, and birds and other wildlife depended on the larger fish. As trillions of mussels continued feeding every day, they removed enormous amounts of this natural food from the water. This change caused serious problems for many fish species. One of the hardest hit was the lake whitefish. Instead of attacking the whitefish directly, the mussels removed the food that whitefish depended on to survive. Small bottom-dwelling creatures that whitefish normally ate began disappearing because they also relied on plankton. As their food became scarce, whitefish grew more slowly, became thinner, and produced fewer healthy young. Many commercial fishermen watched their yearly catches become smaller and smaller. Some crews reportedly left the fishing business because they believed there was no future left in it. Entire communities worried that one of the Great Lakes' most valuable fish might disappear forever. Then something unexpected happened. Scientists allegedly discovered that the whitefish were beginning to change their feeding habits. Instead of depending only on their old food, they slowly started eating young zebra mussels before the shells became too hard. They also fed on drifting mussel larvae and other small creatures connected to the invasion. In some places, they even began eating invasive round gobies, another species that had entered the Great Lakes from overseas. These changes did not completely solve the problem. Whitefish still grew more slowly than they had in earlier years, and their numbers remained lower than before the invasion. Even so, the fish had done something many experts did not expect. They adapted instead of disappearing. Their ability to change their diet allowed many of them to survive during one of the greatest environmental changes ever recorded in the Great Lakes. Although the lake had changed forever, the whitefish refused to give up. Their survival became one of the strongest signs that even damaged ecosystems may still contain the ability to recover when native wildlife finds new ways to live alongside changing conditions. So, if the whitefish managed to survive, what other native animals were quietly helping the Great Lakes fight back? Let's delve deeper. Nature's quiet fight against the invasion. As researchers continued studying the Great Lakes, they allegedly made another surprising discovery. They found that people were not the only ones fighting against the invasive mussels. Several native animals had already started doing that work on their own. No one had trained them. No one had released them into the lakes. They simply responded the way nature had prepared them to respond. Each animal played a different role, and together they slowly helped reduce the growing mussel population. Scientists explained that this natural response involved three important native species. These were diving ducks, the freshwater drum, and the lake whitefish. None of these animals could completely remove the invasive mussels by themselves. However, together they formed a natural defense system that had existed long before anyone realized how valuable it would become. One of the first animals to change its behavior was a group of birds known as diving ducks. These birds did not stay on the surface like many other ducks. Instead, they regularly dived deep below the water to search for food on the lake bottom. Species such as the lesser scaup, greater scaup, common goldeneye, bufflehead, and redhead allegedly discovered that zebra mussels had become an easy food source. During migration, thousands of these ducks gathered across the Great Lakes. They repeatedly disappeared beneath the water before returning to the surface with mussels in their bills. Researchers who studied their feeding habits reportedly found that mussels had become one of the largest parts of their diet. In some areas, where ducks fed freely throughout the migration season, scientists noticed that mussel populations became much smaller than in places where ducks could not reach them. This showed that the birds were helping reduce invasive mussel numbers naturally without any human assistance. Sadly, this important work also came with a serious cost. Zebra and quagga mussels are filter feeders. As they clean the water, they also collect harmful chemicals and pollution that already exist in the lake. Heavy metals such as mercury, along with industrial chemicals like PCBs, cadmium, and selenium, slowly build up inside the mussels' bodies. When the ducks eat large numbers of these mussels, the harmful chemicals also enter the birds. Scientists allegedly believe this may have contributed to declines seen in some duck populations over the years. Habitat loss, climate change, and other environmental problems also played important roles, but pollution moving through the food chain remained one of the biggest concerns. In this way, the ducks were helping protect the lake while quietly placing themselves in danger at the same time. Researchers also continued studying another native species that had been ignored for generations. This fish was the freshwater drum, sometimes called the sheep's head. For many years, fishermen believed it had little value. Some even threw it away after catching it because they considered it a nuisance. However, scientists allegedly discovered that the freshwater drum possessed something no other native freshwater fish in North America had. Deep inside its throat were powerful grinding teeth designed to crush hard shells. These special teeth allowed large freshwater drum to break apart zebra and quagga mussels that many other fish could not eat. Although the drum could not destroy every mussel in the lake, it removed many adult mussels living along rocky lake bottoms. At the same time, lake whitefish targeted younger mussels before their shells fully hardened. Together with the diving ducks feeding in shallow waters, these three native species each focused on different parts of the mussel population. Scientists explained that this teamwork happened naturally without any organized plan. Each species simply followed its natural feeding habits, and together they slowed the invasion more than anyone expected. Even with this encouraging discovery, researchers warned that the Great Lakes had not fully recovered. The water may have looked cleaner than before, but appearances could be misleading. Pollutants continued moving through the food chain as mussels were eaten by fish and birds. Studies allegedly found that fish such as walleye and yellow perch carried higher levels of mercury in some invaded lakes than fish living in lakes without zebra mussels. Because of this, some health agencies continued issuing advice about how much fish people should safely eat. Scientists reminded the public that clear water does not always mean healthy water. The ecosystem had changed in ways that could not always be seen from the surface. Even so, there were signs of hope. In several lakes and rivers, researchers reportedly noticed that invasive mussel populations slowly became smaller after reaching their highest numbers. Experts believe this happened because of several reasons working together. Native predators continued feeding on the mussels, while natural diseases and other biological changes may have also reduced their populations. Unlike expensive chemical treatments or large government cleanup programs, these changes happened naturally over time. Although the invasive mussels have not disappeared, nature has shown an amazing ability to respond when given enough time. As invasive species continued to spread, how did nature begin fighting back on its own? Keep watching for more. Nature finds a way. How wildlife began fighting back. Allegedly, the Great Lakes have been changed by more than 180 invasive species that entered the water over many years. These are plants and animals that do not naturally belong in the lakes, but somehow found their way there. Some of them caused only small changes, but others completely changed how the lakes work. Scientists say the Great Lakes are still trying to adjust even after many years have passed. Some invasive species have become so common that they are now part of everyday life in the lakes. Researchers believe the lakes are still changing, and many questions remain unanswered because nature is continuing to adapt. To better understand the invasion, scientists allegedly started a research project in Good Harbor Bay on Lake Michigan in 2016.
We wanted to see if there was any potential for controlling mussels, at least at a small scale, in Lake Michigan. So in 2016, we decided to start mussel removal project.
They wanted to find out whether removing invasive mussels from a small area could help the lake recover. A large group of volunteer divers joined the project and spent several weeks underwater. Their job was simple but very difficult. They carefully scraped zebra and quagga mussels from rocks on the lake bottom. It took many hours of diving because every rock had to be cleaned by hand. After the work was finished, the researchers did not leave the area. Instead, they returned again and again over the next few years to see what would happen. They expected the mussels to return quickly because the lakes were already filled with them. Surprisingly, that did not happen. Even after 4 years, very few mussels had grown back on the cleaned rocks. This unexpected result made the scientists wonder what was stopping the mussels from returning. After carrying out more studies, they allegedly found that the answer could be another invasive species called the round goby. The researchers also noticed something else after the mussels were removed. The thick mussel beds had created many small hiding places for tiny creatures living on the lake bottom. Small animals, such as arthropods and isopods, used these spaces to stay safe from hungry fish. Once the mussels disappeared, these hiding places also disappeared. Without protection, many of the small animals became easy food for fish swimming nearby. Scientists realized that even though the mussels caused many problems, they had also created new homes for other creatures. This showed that nature can become very complicated because one change often leads to many other changes. Researchers also discovered that native fish slowly learned how to catch round gobies. At first, many fish ignored them because gobies behaved differently from native fish. Instead of staying still when danger came close, gobies quickly shot away in unexpected directions. This confused many predators. Over time, however, fish like smallmouth bass learned how the gobies moved and became much better at catching them. What was once a difficult prey slowly became an important part of their diet. Scientists said this showed that native animals can learn and change when they face new challenges. Other native animals also began taking advantage of the growing goby population. Lake trout reportedly started eating more round gobies than many of the fish they had eaten in the past. Researchers also found that the Lake Erie water snake benefited from the new food source. The snake population had once been in serious trouble, but the large number of gobies reportedly gave the snakes plenty to eat and helped their numbers recover. These discoveries showed that native wildlife can sometimes adjust to major environmental changes in ways that people never expected. Many parts of the ecosystem are still changing, and researchers believe there is still much to learn. They say Lake Michigan continues to change while they study it, making it difficult to predict what the future will look like. For this reason, scientists plan to continue watching the lakes closely so they can better understand how nature responds to these ongoing changes. After invasive mussels spread across the lake, how did they begin changing the entire food web and threaten the wildlife that depended on it? Stay tuned for more. How invasive mussels changed the Great Lakes food web. Allegedly, thick mats of algae have become a common sight along many parts of Lake Michigan's shoreline. Scientists believe this change is closely connected to the spread of invasive quagga mussels. These mussels remove tiny floating plants and animals from the water, making the lake much clearer than before. While clear water may look beautiful, it also allows much more sunlight to reach the bottom of the lake. At the same time, the mussels collect and recycle nutrients, especially phosphorus, and move those nutrients toward the shallow areas near the shore. When extra sunlight and extra nutrients come together, algae can grow very quickly. Over time, large green mats begin to cover rocks, beaches, and shallow water. These algae do not only change the way the shoreline looks, they also create problems for nearby communities. Thick algae can block water intake systems that cities and factories use to collect water. This makes it harder and more expensive to manage clean water supplies. Scientists say this is one example of how one invasive species can change many parts of an ecosystem in ways people did not expect. Researchers have also allegedly found that these large algae mats may be linked to the deaths of fish and birds. When the algae die, they begin to rot and break down. During this process, they use up the oxygen in the water around them. This creates places where there is little or no oxygen left. Such conditions allow a naturally occurring bacterium called Clostridium botulinum to grow. This bacterium can produce a dangerous poison that affects fish, birds, and other animals. Scientists believe the rotting algae provide the rich environment that the bacteria need to multiply. Although more research is still being carried out, many experts believe this may help explain why botulism outbreaks have been seen in some parts of the Great Lakes. Understanding this process is important because it may help scientists reduce future wildlife deaths and better protect the lake. To understand these changes, researchers continue to study the lake throughout the year. They collect water samples, algae, mussels, mud, and many small animals from different parts of the lake. Every sample is carefully examined to learn how much plankton is being removed and how nutrients are moving through the water. Scientists also study the tiny living things found around mussel beds because these organisms are an important part of the food chain. By gathering information over many years, researchers hope to understand how the lake is changing and how different plants and animals are responding. Their work also helps explain how changes at the bottom of the food chain can affect much larger animals higher up in the ecosystem. Scientists also say the lake's food web has allegedly changed in a major way. There is now much less plankton in the deeper offshore waters than there was in the past. At the same time, more plant growth is happening close to the shoreline because more sunlight reaches the lake bottom. Some fish may be able to adjust to these new conditions by changing what they eat or where they feed. Other fish are finding it much harder to survive. Fish such as coho salmon depend heavily on alewives for food, while alewives depend mainly on plankton. As plankton becomes harder to find, alewife numbers also fall. With fewer alewives available, coho salmon lose an important food source. Scientists believe this shows how one small change at the bottom of the food chain can spread through the whole lake and affect many different animals. What do you think about the invasive mussels in Lake Michigan? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we explored the hidden battle taking place beneath the waters of the Great Lakes. If you enjoyed learning about this remarkable environmental story, please like and subscribe. Click on the next video to discover another fascinating story. See you there.